Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Echovale, it does. They need me.
Welcome, End of Dragons Daily 66. It's going to be another short one today. There's been no streams, there's been no alternate videos. Bit of a nightmare, really. First comment here from Leus OS, who said, I just want to say you're doing a great job with this series, despite all the technical PC hiccups and such. Keep up the great work. So, yeah, we are still in the process of moving to the new PC. The footage you're watching today is going to be, like, world versus world a bit, maybe. Strike missions a bit, maybe. Map completion a bit, maybe. You know, the same things I've been doing over and over and over again. And it's still going to be in low quality because the transition is still in progress. Hopefully that's okay, though, guys. I just wanted to touch base with today's part and get at least some comments in there. We'll be doing a variety of miscellaneous things, all about the expansion, of course, and hopefully it's fun. Please feel free to keep responding. You guys were amazing in the comments last time. I've been really happy while I can get in game to see the guild still doing really well. So overall, looking like a good time, but I wish I could get more out. A sincere apology to all of you guys on the lack of videos lately. Let's jump in. First, we've got Joshua, who says, you talked about the shapes of maps a few episodes ago. I had a conversation with a dev once on this topic where they started introducing non-rectangular maps. All maps must be rectangular in the engine. The game does, after all, run on an XYZ grid. However, particular map borders and the corresponding unfogging of the map art can be adjusted to suit the terrain. It's a useful way of trimming the amount of content they have to fill, such as deep ocean surrounding islands. This was first shown off with Ember Bay, which had some pretty serious map bugs on release. Gentle curves on map design didn't become a standard until Living World Season 4, where almost every map used it, except for Dragonfall for obvious reasons. They still had plenty of bugs, most notably the giant cliff between East and West Jahai that couldn't unfog even on full map completion. All rectangles are equal, but some rectangles are more rectangle than others. This is an interesting response. I like hearing that comes from a dev. To be honest, you've lost me on some of the points. What do you mean gentle curves? Like, first of all, the first like fully surrounded island map, as far as I can remember, is South Sun Cove. And that felt kind of Ember Bay in a lot of respects. Ember Bay was particularly weird because of the north coast. Like, if you think back to that map, especially if you've done the Massart token collection, it was actually really well made with lots of detail and small caves and cubby holes all over the place, except for the north coast, which was just a sheer wall that looked very work in progress and very weird if you went round up there, and you know, was a little bit disappointing, frankly. We didn't see any of that, I don't think. Is there really an equivalent place in Dragonfall all the way through the subsequent releases? So I think they've been doing a pretty good job, and I don't expect to see any of that Ember Bay style stuff in End of Dragons, or indeed the Living World releases that come after it. There are some candidates for like a living world map that could just be on an island, and Xingji itself, if they're doing massive Path of Fire style maps, Xingji could be completely surrounded by water, but I think that they'll do it well. I really do. Also, why do they have to be rectangles? Surely they could in theory all be squares, right? The point is they're gonna have some kind of square dimension, right? 4 corners, and then they can carve into it, you know, more immersive, curved, rounded borders and boundaries that obscure the fact that it's basically just a giant square. And what I think happened at core, because really this giant square rectangle thing on the world map art is a core thing. I think the reason it ended up looking that way was just because they wanted to squeeze as much space out of every apportioned area as was possible, and it kind of created this ugly side effect that maybe wasn't so intended. I do remember as Heart of Thorns was coming out, for what it's worth, that Auric Basin, its world map art, was really clunkily like plonked on top, and that looked very, very much like just a square. You could tell that they hadn't like shaded in or done the actual artwork on the map. And then of course there was the Path of Fire leaks, which very clearly showed 5 massive giant rectangles just plonked down. But you know, then they'll go and they'll draw after it. There's kind of 2 discussions going on here. One is the in-game experience. Does it feel like a square? And unfortunately sometimes it does. Even in, say, Path of Fire, where you're standing on Augury Rock, you can see all these big rectangular cliffs around you off in the distance. And especially if you play with like Guild Wars Hook and Move the Fog and stuff. And then there's the discussion of the world map art, which I think is much easier to actually clean away and hide. in both cases, I still think it's a matter of artistry and implementation rather than some kind of engine limitation. Adrian Lang says, here's an idea I had in preparation for End of Dragons. Go back to Guild Wars factions and look at some of the landmarks, then consider whether they'll be a part of Guild Wars 2. I'll give you one I visited. In the Haiju Lagoon, there's a small island not far from the shoreline where there's a mid-level Naga boss. It's called Uruso Island and has a winding trail up the Pillar of Rock. Might be interesting to do a feature on some of the more prominent landmarks of Cantha and wonder what state they'll be in during End of Dragons. Yeah, I'd love to do this for several Living World releases. Admittedly, not every single one, and it's not always appropriate. But for several Living World releases, I have done videos where I go back to Guild Wars 1 and like play through what we know the upcoming area of the world is and show you guys that stuff. I can't really remember doing it for POF. Did we do a general Crystal Desert playthrough? We might have, right? It's always a little bit unpredictable, tricky to find stuff out. Like I always remember with the Corner release that they had the really rare shield drop, the Branded Eye of Argon, which was kind of an homage to a thing in Guild Wars 1. In theory, I could have caught and done a video on, but it's such an like obscure thing that they drew on. And you never know how many situations there will be like this for End of Dragons. I think you can expect a lot of those old greens. And yeah, prominent bosses may be named in the future. If you look at, say, Drizzlewood Coast, there's the Petrage's Overlook. That was a Tengu boss, and we did actually catch that in a video when I did my sort of run-through of the Verdant Cascades just before Drizzlewood Coast came out. Man, that was a long time ago now, even though it was the most recent map still at this point in the game. So I do want to do this. I think the best timing, though, is after another trailer or after an announcement of explicit areas we will be going. You know, I really think the devs could do some great stuff with the press for this expansion, where, like, they spend a week giving us blog posts and concept art and music and fun background on an upcoming region, whether that's Kaineng Center or whether that's Xingji. And, you know, they could get like 4 weeks worth of decent press out of that, dedicating a week each time to a different area. And I would love to be able to cover that and actually then also go in-game and give you guys a good grand tour on each occasion, because as it stands, doing all of Cantha and all the cool highlights and landmarks just dumped out there at almost random time is not something I really want to do. And it could be a long series as well for its worth. I know where you're talking about the Haiju Lagoon. I feel like every explorable map has a bunch of cool things I'd love to show off. And the Abridged series I did last year doesn't quite nail those, does it? Not really. I think my original Let's Play does, but let's face it, that's pretty old at this point. I'm getting to the point where I'm struggling to actually recommend my original LPs to people, just because the quality and the voice and everything is so different. It's like an alternate world. Very strange. Next, we got Danny CC8, who says, hey WP, I'm not sure if you talked about this in End of Dragons Daily Series yet, but I would love to see them implement new jumping puzzles in this expansion. Well, we did talk about it a little bit in one of these parts. They've so far put new types of jumping puzzles in the Living World, but not really in any of the expansions. The only thing that resembles them in the Expacts is that one mastery in the Canopy and Verdant Brink. It also makes me wonder what secret areas they could put in the new map, since it really encourages deeper exploration. Congrats on the new PC, by the way. I checked the wiki, and I did find there were 4 other jumping puzzles in Hearthorns that I forgot about, but none in PF. Look, I think the jumping puzzle discussion, or lack thereof, has a big facet to it, and that's masteries. I think as soon as masteries came into the mix, it became harder for the devs to justify jumping puzzles, because the expansions in particular are a bulk release of masteries and a celebration of what those masteries allow you to do. And a lot of those times, those masteries are based on movement. You know, they never really got the language and communication and lore and world building masteries down just right. So they're about movement. And when you can move more, jumping puzzles either have to dramatically change, or you just don't do them. And we've seen that they kind of just don't do them. Like with Path of Fire, we got all these amazing new mounts. Did the devs figure out how to do an area of the world that you can only be on a raptor on, and it's a raptor-based jumping puzzle? No, they didn't. Did they do that for any other mounts? No. So you can always kind of undermine the experience by getting on one of these fancy new things you just unlocked, and they kind of don't want to take them away from you because you just got it in the expansion and they want you to be able to have fun with it. That said, I think we kind of discredit Path of Fire to a certain degree. Because, yeah, there aren't like these formal, cordoned away areas of the world that maybe take you somewhere pretty and you have this kind of like dexterity challenge. But they do integrate jumping puzzle-esque experiences in there all over the place. You know, I just mentioned the raptor thing. What is that heart where you're catching fireflies on your raptor at the very beginning of Path of Fire, essentially? That's kind of a jumping puzzle for raptors, right? They kind of found a way to do it. Isn't there sort of a similar experience for all of them? You know, when you think about the giant floating Djinn fortress with the sand jackals, and you're leaping around pillar to pillar, isn't that kind of jumping puzzle-ish? When we talk about going to new special areas, isn't taking that jackal portal at nighttime north of the desert highlands, so you're on a giant floating ghostly palace out in the starry sky, isn't that kind of a jumping puzzle-y experience? It's just we're missing that kind of dexterity side to it. And that's kind of a challenging element too when you come to a game like this that now has a veteran player base where the skill level is so hard to predict. Like, let's go back to Siren's Landing. This is just before Path of Fire, obviously. Siren's Landing had a really amazing jumping puzzle, but they really eased off on the dexterity requirements. That jumping puzzle was more about like, wow, this is a time investment to get to the top, and it feels incredible to get to the top, and you get these amazing vistas and stuff. But it wasn't really that hard. And I think one of the reasons that that's happened is because as the game has got older, there's a lot of people who are very good and very used to jumping puzzles. Like a player like me, and probably those of you watching in the audience, if we go back and do some of the vanilla JPs, we just blow through them. And it's not just because we know where to go, but it's because we're very used to how the hitboxes and collision and movement works on our character. You know, if you've been playing a Char the whole time, it's easy. If you've been playing a Norn the whole time, it's easy. It's especially easy if you're on an Asura or whatever. So we don't struggle. But when we were new to the game, you know, something that takes me 5 minutes now could have taken like a half-an-hour video. And I've got the videos online to prove it in a playlist. So now you're talking about new expansions, and the idea is new people are coming in. They have to get new people in. And you're looking at a release like Siren's Landing with the tower. They've kind of got to aim for a middle ground. If they push for the harder stuff, you kind of get a lot of complaining. And, you know, case in point, Chalice of Tears. That was a long time ago now with the Ember Bay release. Cool, Ember Bay's come a lot in today's part, hasn't it? But I think it taught the studio that there's too much disparity in the kind of dexterity people have in this community. So aim somewhere in the middle or aim somewhere low. And that is a story, for what it's worth, that is happening all over Guild Wars 2. It happens with buildcraft, it happens with raiding, tuning and difficulty, it happens with personal story instances, and so on. It's kind of a big MMO industry thing that, you know, my recent foray into Final Fantasy XIV, I feel has taught me even more about. So as for End of Dragons, I think one nice solution is do what you did in Path of Fire. Again, you know, integrate these cool, like, jumping-y experiences. And they were in a lot of places for POF. I can think of a lot of random events that kind of even have you jumping around in hidden places. Come to think of it, there's that pretty great Sand Jackal temple jumping puzzle right there in the first map at the Crystal Oasis. Remember? That was definitely a jumping puzzle, and definitely based on one specific mastery. But maybe tie it to the masteries a little bit more. If like wall running and grappling and all that kind of city movement that we're talking about is a thing, maybe they can play with those. Some kind of jumping puzzle in the canopy of the Echovale forest would make me very, very, very happy. You know, a final moment of the jumping puzzle, you finally push through the tree line and you see this beautiful sun above you that you haven't seen for ages, you know, shining across the tops of just a sea of trees. That's an image I've had in my mind for years. I hope to see. Next we have Coup Turtle. Topic idea, things that other MMOs do you'd love to see Guild Wars 2 do. Personally, I thought the quests that were tied to your profession in 14 were one of the only things keeping me in that game. I'd love to see a second personal story that's tied to your profession. It would add a lot to the leveling experience, give beginners a fresh 2021 ArenaNet developed story as opposed to very outdated original personal story. Well, I mean, you've kind of identified an issue that I think is very valid, and, you know, a lot of our discussion about a new race was addressing that as well. I don't really think that this is feasible. I think that the devs are going to keep pushing into new territory, but as a fundamental idea, I agree with you. I think that class quests would have been really fun. Guild Wars 1 kind of had them to a certain degree early on in like pre-searing, you know, finding a specific skill trainer that would teach you in the ways of some secondary profession. And it is fun in FF14, it's been fun in any kind of MMO or RPG game that has multiple classes and branch you off based on that. I just don't think that it's going to be what ArenaNet really focus on. That said, I think there's a lot they can learn from other MMOs. I mean, don't just blindly ape them, I think that can be dangerous, but there is stuff. There's about a million things I could say from FF14. One that I think would be very viable and I really miss is that game, as far as like interacting with NPCs and getting dialogue, that game has a really good camera for that stuff. You right click the NPC and the camera sort of like semi-locks. You can still manipulate it and move it, but it's now centered on the person you're talking to rather than centered on your own character. And it really helps you to like get a sense that you're properly talking to someone. Doesn't take too much control away, lets you see their animations. I would love it if Guild Wars 2 had that. Particularly as someone who's like let's playing and running through all the story and stuff, it's always so annoying to get the right camera angle in Guild Wars 2, and Square Enix have had a brilliant solution there forever. That's not like a paradigm shift in the game or anything, but for me personally, that's the first thing that springs it off my mind when I'm asked this question. Dune says, how do you think that the Echovale will be designed? Will it be as vertical as the Tangled Depths? Will we scale trees like in Better Frost Frontier? What could be up in the trees if we do get to explore them? Will there be a crashed airship in the forest? It's kind of funny, you saying a crashed airship in the forest, I mean, it's very Verdant Brink, isn't it? It's very Heart of Thorns. I kind of don't want to see that. What I really want to see is not just a forest to explore. I want to see a petrified forest filled with massive echoing halls and cathedrals and beautiful architecture. And the funny thing is, I know I just mentioned like the jumping paths and go into the canopy. That I all like the idea of. But I think Bitter Frost Frontier is a great example you've given and shows what they can do with bouncing mushrooms. The idea of bouncing your way up these trees like in a big circular fashion or something would be very cool. But the main thing I really want, and I don't really see people talking about much, is I want the interiors to be done well. The Guild Wars 1 Echovale Forest had a weird way of making you feel like you were in this like third space where you're not really indoors, but you're not really outdoors. Am I in a big open hall cathedral right now, or am I just out in a forest? You know, when you think of missions like Arborstone, or even when you're just wandering around, there was this weird kind of like ethereal blending there, and I'd love to see Guild Wars 2 play with that a little bit more. But especially I want to get the sense, you know, they've got so much beautiful concept art of the Echovale Forest with these great stone cathedrals carved into a trunk. I want to see that in game, and I want to be able to walk in. Do you remember how in the original Guild Wars 2 trailer they have that shot that shows Divinity's Reach? It's been a concept art reel so far, and we're looking at the city as concept art, and then it kind of melts and you realize you're looking at an in-game render, and the in-game render is actually very accurate to what their artists had done. And then that was a big thing about Guild Wars 2's aesthetic, so on, so on, so on. I would love to see that again, but substitute Divinity's Reach with some kind of massive fortification out there in the Echovale. And I'd love to see the camera, instead of panning off to the side, I'd love to see us actually go straight on in and see some of these places. The only thing that's even felt remotely like that so far in Guild Wars 2, I would say, is the Vigil Keep or Gandara, maybe. And we all know the numerous ways in which Gandara didn't quite hit certain bars. So yeah, that's what I want, and all this other stuff is totally valid too. Finally, Brian Turner says, sorry I posted this before, WP, I'm still catching up, forgive me if this is out of place. You mentioned in a prior video you'd like to see AFK fishing. I feel like ArenaNet shoos away from AFK activities because of the map cap. Imagine if throughout the map 50 plus people were AFK, the map would feel super empty with a percentage of the population on it just fishing. I'm not sure how to solve this other than a certain period of time an AFK player no longer counted against the cap. But then if a bunch became active at once, there's a higher number of active players than what the cap should allow. On a similar note, I hope we get a dedicated Kaineng City and not something like the Crystal Oasis, which felt too much like the explorable area's population cap was taken by the city. Yeah, having an actual dedicated full-on map for Kaineng would be interesting to see, because we've never seen the devs so far add to the original pool of 6 major cities. And I don't really buy population arguments when it comes to this stuff anymore, not since they added all of those lobbies, which are basically mini lame versions of what could be full cities. As to the fishing thing, my mind with fishing as an AFK activity, first of all, is precisely because the devs have shied away from it. That means there is that space in the MMO to indulge in it, you know? What you have to remember is all the AFK features or content, so to speak, in the game so far has been found and created by the community, unintended by the studio, and the economies and everything around it was not balanced or designed for that. But if they had that as an opening premise, then they can do things with it, and they've never had that as an opening premise, so I'm sure that there's a lot of creative space there. And the reason I've argued for it as an AFK-ish, and I've only ever argued it as a semi-AFK thing, is precisely because I think it would make the game feel more populated. My main mind with this is not necessarily new maps. I wouldn't want to have fishing, and it's only available in Canthan maps, and now the main way most people are playing it is just standing around doing nothing. You're right, that's hideous. That is not what I would argue. What I would like to see the feature feature be utilized for is encouraging people to go back to all the previous maps, particularly Corteria, wherever there are bodies of water there, to be spread out, not all bundled into one little area, but actually making use of a lot of the existing gameplay space that currently is not being used. It's not true that the Plains of Ashford is always sitting at the player cap. It's not true that Fireheart Rises. It's not true that Timberline Falls is. Even when like an anomaly event or something is up, these maps are still mostly barren. And so I think that you'd actually have people quite well spread out. And again, as I've argued, a semi-AFK activity actually allows people to be that extra bit social. And I think in those situations, you'd actually now see a lot more happening in map chat, and I'd argue that is the main thing to make the game feel populated. If you gave me, on one hand, the choice of running around Queensdale, there's no map chat whatsoever, no local chat whatsoever, but sometimes I'll see someone zoom past me on a roller beetle, or sometimes someone will glance me near a dynamic event and then wander off, right? Absolutely no interaction. Or on the other hand, I mostly see people sort of idle around water, but map chat stuff is always happening, and then I go to another map and there's stuff happening in map chat, and I go to another map and there's stuff happening in map chat. I will take that option over the first one every time, because I don't actually think that the current glancing of other players is a substantive experience anyway in Guild Wars 2. So those were kind of my thoughts on that topic. Well, there you go, guys. That's End of Dragons Daily. Thanks very much for watching. I hope desperately to have a part for you out tomorrow, and I also have managed to shoot the next part of the story playthrough. We'll be in Grothmar, we'll be meeting Banger, all that fun stuff. And I managed to get good graphics even though it's on this rig, which is quite nice. And I have started testing the Guild Wars 2 setup as well over on the other PC. It's really weird. Sometimes I basically get as bad frames as ever. I managed to get down to 8 FPS in an open world Zerg. I'm not joking, the Great Jungle Worm in Caledon Forest. But I also managed to get 500 frames in World vs. World Borderland, with no Zergs around, obviously. So, yeah, kind of crazy fluctuations there. I'll have lots more to say on it and talk about when we're fully up and running. So thanks, everybody. Give me all your comments, thoughts, questions. I'll be desperate for them on the next part. And thanks to everybody joining the guild. We're still open. Just hit the link in the description for the Discord if you want to join. You don't need an account or anything like that. It will just take you straight through. And I'll see you next time.